Hello. Hello and welcome, and congrats to everyone gathered here, and thank you for your patience and durability, for surviving all of this day and coming here to join us on a talk about sanctions, on how they're being dodged and how we can actually expose the people doing that. So at first, I'd like to introduce our panel and our guest speakers. I'll start from the very left, where we have Linda Söderlund, great friend and colleague from Yle in Finland. Then we have Robert Dennis, the editor for Central Asia from the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. Then we have a dear friend and colleague from very near frontier, Latvia, Sanita Jemberga, Investigative Journalism Center, Baltica. And last but definitely not least, Stas Ivashkevich, the founder and director of the Belarusian Investigative Center. And myself, I'm Šarūnas, and I run a tiny investigative media outlet in Lithuania called Siena. By accident, it translates as border, and so it just happened that we spent most of the last 2 years investigating sanction evasion. So what do we have to deal with? First of all, sanctions. In the current situation with sanctions, the wave after wave of sanctions is absolutely unprecedented, and it's a great challenge for all the European countries and European authorities. There are many reasons for that. One of them, of course, being the sanctions being so complicated and us ourselves getting them to be even more complicated. The other thing, of course, is getting beaten by experience, because Russia and Belarus have decades of experience in circumventing sanctions, and most of Europe is still learning to dismantle the mechanisms. But first, I'd like to start with a short presentation to present some of the telltale signs when it comes to exposing sanction evasion. Because, well, the information is out there. We've investigated money laundering cases where you had to rely heavily on various leaks in many of the cases. But in this case, sanction evasion leaves footprints. It can be recognized, it can be shown by information from the public domain. A key instrument here is statistics, and I'm going to go a little deeper into that shortly. Of course, company records. In some cases, company records can serve as the evidence you need to actually prove that something shady is going on. We've also got people. People in various industries, especially in trade, that see something bad going on in their industries, in their companies, and they don't want to be silent about it. They want to do something about it, and they usually approach journalists. And last but not least, data leaks, which also happens, and that is another gold mine to shovel through. When it comes to finding the leads, of course, to find the leads, you need to dive into sanctions and understand how they work. There are separate sanction lists for Russia and Belarus, which is a huge blunder on the European side, but we're going to talk about it with all of our speakers. But you need to get acquainted with how it works and understand how to follow the trade sanctions. The key element here is the commodity code. Usually the European sanctions limit the commodities banned from being traded with Russia and or Belarus to 4 digits. So it's a 4-digit play most of the time. Sometimes we go deeper and it gets even more complicated. But those numbers, well, usually when you dive into an investigation on sanctions, the 4 digits is something you're going to memorize for the next 6 months or so. You're going to know those 4 digits if someone wakes you up in the middle of the night, because that's all the story is revolving about. And it can be followed. It can be followed and recognized by exploring basic statistics. The most common tools are Eurostat for European countries and UN Comtrade, the United Nations International Trade Database, which is in many cases the most reliable tool we have. Here's an example from a recent story we did. This example shows that timing, in many cases, and of course visualizing the data is key. Here we have two graphs. It's from a story we did on circumventing sanctions of exports of air conditioning units to a nice little country called Belarus. And it was done by masquerading that trade as if it was going to Kyrgyzstan, which was false. So the blue line is the trade with Belarus, the export of that particular commodity, the 4 digits, 8415, something I memorized, of course, and it suddenly plummets. But all of a sudden, the trade is being replaced by another flow to a Central Asian country, in this particular case, Kyrgyzstan. So timing is key. Actually visualizing data sets and having something like this or something that looks nicer is a very, very comfy tool. And we have multiple usual suspects. When it comes to the Eastern EU member states, of course, it's mainly Central Asia, but also its nearest neighbors like Georgia, Armenia, and, well, a lot of that entire region. The reason why? It's actually blunt and simple. It's easy to masquerade this as an actual trade. Because if you are exporting something from, let's say, Poland or the Baltics or Finland to Kyrgyzstan, to Armenia, the logical route to take is across Russia or Belarus. So it makes sense. And, of course, for the southern member states, it's Turkey. Turkey is a huge gaping hole when it comes to sanction evasion. Lots and lots of things to and from Russia are going through Turkey, and seems like the EU isn't doing much about it. And Turkey, well, Turkey is making some money, of course. Then, real quick, a key method we're using is mirror statistics. Basically, a telltale sign of sanction evasion happening is mismatches in statistics reported by different countries. Here is another illustration from the same story about air conditioning units. On the right, you see the exports of this exact merchandise declared by Lithuania. That's how much Lithuania says it has exported to Kyrgyzstan. And on the left, there are the imports of the same goods declared by Kyrgyzstan. And we see a huge gap. We see a lot, in this case, of air conditioning units that just disappeared on the way from Lithuania to Kyrgyzstan. So mirror statistics is a great tool, and I encourage you to use it as much as possible. Here, UN Comtrade is the best way, especially when it comes to comparing data from different blocks, let's say the EU or Central Asia or Turkey, because we have lots of data and it's the same database, so the discrepancies in statistics are coherent, and it's actually a very good bit of evidence. And now, last but not least, some tips and tricks on how to actually find the perpetrators. Import Genius. When it comes to things reaching Russia, Import Genius is a commercial database where you can actually find those imports. You can find companies from your countries surfacing in imports in Russia that are not supposed to be happening. And here, another trick they are using often is mingling with the commodity codes. Because, let's say, a code that ends with 26 is under sanctions, so they just go across the border with a code that ends with 27. But on the Russian side, it's already 26 again. It's a bunch of sanctioned goods. And the Russian side doesn't hide it, which is actually useful and comfortable. We've got multiple cases of European companies actually smuggling sanctioned goods across the border just by playing around with commodity codes. The reason why? Well, the customs officials aren't extreme specialists of particular goods, and they cannot distinguish between, something that's really similar and, well, this is under sanctions or this is not. We don't know. Sources within industries, in our experience, that appear to be a very, very good source of information, because there are decent businesses in every trade, And those decent businesses are the ones that suffer because their competitors are trading in sanctioned goods, and in case of imports, they're getting them cheaper. In case of exports, they're making a lot of extra money. So it's unfair competition, and there's a lot of decent businesses unhappy with what's going on and having information about particular cases and particular companies involved in sanction evasion. Whistleblowers, I've mentioned that already. Also, we've got the third year of the war going on, and roughly the same period of sanctions being implemented. So there's multiple court rulings just sitting there and waiting for you to find them. Also, you shouldn't disregard the companies that are known to be involved in sanction evasion. Because, well, for them it's business. Crime is business, and if they have an opportunity to expose their competitors in the dirty business, they might just be willing to, because that's, well, more money for them. So do not disregard the bad guys. Government sources. We had a very good talk a few days ago, and some people in government agencies are really frustrated because when they go after someone to prove they're evading sanctions, proving the evasion in journalism standards and in legal standards is something very, very different. So in some cases, the government agencies know the perpetrators, but they also know that, well, according to their legal standards, they're going to be unable to nail those guys. So if you develop sources and connections within the government agencies responsible for sanction implementation, that can result in some great stories for you. And this is not sources, but this is extremely important. When it comes to sanction evasion, it's never connected to a single country. There's always two or more countries involved. And of course, you can try to do it yourself. You can find databases, you can browse, research data, do the analysis, etc. But it's going to be always much more efficient and much more impactful if you find people to work with in the countries involved. So I strongly encourage cross-border collaboration because this is absolutely the key. And now, with pleasure, I would like to give the floor to Linda, who has a great story to tell about the actual practice of how it's going on and what ILE did.
Thank you. Can you roll the next? Yes. I'm going to tell you about a TV investigation I made together with my colleague Axel Rappe last year. Its name is the Russian export scam. But first, have someone of you used a tracker like this? It's something you can attach on keyrings or in your child's backpack or on the dog collar, and then you attach this tracker to an app, and then you can follow where the dog is running or if your child already went home from school, and you can find your keyrings. We used these trackers to investigate where luxury cars went. First, we received a tip from that luxury cars were shipped from Germany to the harbor of Kotka in Finland. And there was a suspicion that these cars ended up in Russia. And I'm soon going to show you a short clip from when we managed to attach these trackers to the cars. It was close to the Vaalimaa customs station near the Russian border. And before this, we had been actually waiting for the right time to find the right truck with the cars for several days. So when we finally found the right truck, we were quite excited.
Transporten har ett estiskt registernummer. Den ena personbilen är en mörkblå BMW X3 och den andra en vit Lexus RX 350. Eventuellt finns det en tredje bil inne i lastutrymmet.
Det där är nog nya bilar.
Det ser nog ut som nya bilar.
Ja, jag prickar här nu färdigt. Den här. Vi kör förbi. Vi far den från andra hållet. Där framme. Den rör sig ännu. Den är bakom de där räckorna där. Okej, han stiger ut. Yes. Jag har en. Och du har den där. Då har vi båda två. Yes. Jag vet vilken jag har.
Vi har tur. Biltransporten parkerar utanför köpcentret i Vaalimaa och chauffören går in för att handla.
Jag sätter på bilen. Eller sätter vi på varsin bil eller sätter vi på varsin bil? Vi tar på där. Okej. Oh my god, hej! Nu har vi det! Wow! Oho. Alltså det är vi som vi är här.
Ja.
Och sändarna är där.
Ja, men det stämmer. Bra jobbat.
Mycket bra jobbat.
Efter all den här väntan.
So I'll get back on what happened with these truckers and the cars. But first, let's quickly rewind and look at the background to the investigation. As you all know, the goal of the sanctions is to weaken Russia's economy and prevent the export of technology that can be used in the war in Ukraine. And especially at the beginning, it was also thought that the sanctions would affect public opinion in Russia, so that the Russian people would be angry with Putin when they cannot buy the normal Western goods in the stores anymore. So with our investigation, we wanted to figure out if it still was possible for the Russians to import luxury cars despite the sanctions. And at this time, a year ago, it was already forbidden to export luxury cars to Russia, but it was still legal to use Russia as a transit country. So it was possible, for example, to export the cars to Kazakhstan through Russia, but not that they stay in Russia. So after we had attached the trackers, we followed our app and could see that the cars crossed the Russian border the next day. After the first stop in St. Petersburg, the cars' transport continued.
Några dagar senare fortsätter bilarna österut och den 8 juni stannar de i utkanten av sydvästra Moskva. Vår kontakt i Moskva åker ut till ett småindustriområde. Hen får syn på en biltransport, men våra bilar finns inte med på släpet. Det här ruffiga området verkar vara en uppsamlingsplats för nya bilar. Men vart tar de vägen sen? Åker de vidare till Kazakstan eller stannar de i Moskva och dyker upp i lyxiga bilaffärer runt om i stan?
Personbilarna med våra sändare stannar inte i Moskva utan fortsätter österut via Nizhny Novgorod och Ekaterinburg och närmar sig Kazakstan. Till vår förvåning svänger bilarna inte av till Kazakstan utan kör förbi och stannar först i Tomsk i Sibirien. Den mörkblå BMW:n börjar köra omkring i Tomsk och på kvällarna återvänder den till gatorna i närheten av Lenin-avenyn. Vi utgår från att någon har köpt bilen och nu har tagit den i bruk. Den vita Lexusen däremot stannar i en bilaffär på Pushkingatan. Vem är det som har sålt bilarna i Tomsk? Vem vinner på att bilarna fraktas 5000 kilometer genom Ryssland?
Yes, who is making money by transporting cars 5,000 kilometers through Russia? We started to check out the Russian car site, drom.ru, and found an advertisement that matched the white Lexus. And the picture here is from the car shop in Tomsk. We found a contact that went to the shop and could see that he went inside and could see that our Lexus was inside for sale. And it turned out that this same car had been for sale already earlier, but with pictures from Canada. So we continued the research, and in the end we found a quite long chain of companies and private persons that have been involved in this scheme. First, a private person in Canada bought the brand new car. He sold it to a company in Canada called Deluxe Auto Incorporated. And this company exported the car to a car dealer in Germany. And the car dealer in Germany exported the car or fixed the transport to Finland. And in Finland there was a transport company that took the cars in the harbor of Kotka, and they arranged the custom papers and transported the cars over the border to Russia. And then in Tomsk there was another car dealer called Deluxe Auto Logistics, the one who tried to sell the car in Russia. And as you can see, the names of the companies are quite similar. The one in Canada, Deluxe Auto Incorporated, it's quite same or similar to Deluxe Auto Logistics. So what we found was that several of these companies had some kind of contacts to or connections to Russia or Central Asia. We don't know how many or how extensive this car fraud was, but other than it was something that had been going on for quite a long time, systematically many years. So with these small trackers, we managed to prove that companies still could export luxury cars to Russia last year, despite the sanctions. Thank you.
Linda, I've already got a question for you.
Yeah.
First of all, a technical one. How long does the battery work for this thing?
I'm not sure, but this is a Samsung Galaxy Smart Tag, and they say it can last up to 1 year. So
nice.
Yeah. So for a long time.
And did you actually work on a whistleblower report, or was it just improvising, knowing that this is going on and you need to find a particular spot on the border? Because you were following a truck to the border. I'm really interested.
Yeah. We knew, or we had a contact in Kotka, the harbor of Kotka, who told us about this. And then we wanted to figure out, but he was not sure if this was where the cars really ended up. But we wanted to prove it.
And it was a case of fake exports to Kazakhstan.
That's what we think, yeah. The customs in Finland, they have seen that some companies have double papers. They have some custom papers made for the Finnish customs, and then other papers for the Russian customs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Which reminds me of one of the funniest cases that actually happened in Lithuania. There was a case of fake imports. Wood is banned from importing into the EU from both Russia and Belarus, and we had a case when a truck drives up to the Lithuanian border, it gets checked, and the customs officer asks for all the documents, and the guy is well prepared. He has all the evidence, documented evidence, that the wood actually comes from Kyrgyzstan, and he's asked to provide the packing list for the truck, and he does. He does have everything that's needed. But the date on the packing list is 2 days ago. So the guy tells he drove all the way from Kyrgyzstan, which is roughly 5,000 kilometers, in less than 2 days. That's a world record. And they make these blunders. But we touched Belarus here, and that's for a reason. Linda spoke about luxury cars, and another way to smuggle luxury cars to Russia is across Belarus, because we have ridiculous discrepancies in sanctions, and it's illegal to send a Lexus to Russia, but it's perfectly legal to do it to Belarus. And then they end up in Russia just as well and just as legally. So, Stas, would you like to share some of your experience in sanction evasion?
Yeah. Well, there was an investigation about imports of luxury cars by our colleagues from Bureau Media, which showed basically that there was no limitations on it, and because of the Belarus and Russia having a joint customs union, no border between each other, the sanctions not being against Belarus just allowed to knock yourself out and import as many luxury cars as you want. Now, the way we generally we've done probably altogether about a dozen of sanctions evasion stories, and they usually work in a similar way. So first we look what in the trade after the sanctions introduction went significantly down. So Belarus is, we see what goes down, and then we see if that goes down, what goes up instead. So for example, we saw that wood was a very important source of income for the Lukashenko regime, and we see that sanctions are introduced, and some wood factories are still working. So we inquire the Eurostat, and we see that yes, the wood from Belarus goes significantly down. The wood from Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan goes up. So we immediately start suspecting that it's a sanctions evasion scheme, and then we use either trade databases or sources to get the documents to actually narrow down the focus on the actual companies who do this, who execute the sanction evasion. So we did an investigation together with Siena, and it was actually quite successful in terms of real life effect. Generally, Lithuanian authorities are very responsive, and the import of so-called Kyrgyz wood was shut down. Our colleagues from Siena actually did an undercover operation, met the sellers of the wood who actually admitted the wood being Belarusian. So the Lithuanian authorities completely stopped the imports of so-called Kyrgyz wood into Lithuania. A year later, we revisited the story, and we saw that instead of the Kyrgyz wood being imported to the EU, Kazakh wood is now the big thing being imported into the EU. And moreover, Lithuania also decreased significantly the imports of Kazakh wood, but its neighbors, Poland and Latvia, continue to allow this Kazakh wood in, and we have been able to prove with a mixture of leaked databases and source documents that some of this wood ends up in Lithuania through the back door, through Poland and through Latvia. Moreover, what we saw there is that there is a much simpler way of sanctions. Well, we see two developments. First of all, some of the schemes get more complicated, and for example, they don't pretend to be from they don't pretend to be from one next country, but they use they make the transfer of the sanctioned goods through two countries. So, for example, we saw a surge of exports of wood into Azerbaijan, but then we see there is no similar surge of Azerbaijani exports into the EU, but then we see that there is a surge of Azerbaijan's exports of wood to Georgia and Turkey, and from there is a surge of exports into the EU. So they use sometimes the two-step system of hiding the sanctions. But another thing that they use is, as we saw on the Kazakh wood, is simply by faking documents. So what they do is they just draw documents in Photoshop. We discovered it by using Photoshop and actually putting the stamps on each other and signatures on each other, and they're perfectly the same. It's impossible in nature that you have completely identical stamps. And yeah, we've consulted the authorities, and it sent requests to the authorities, and it turns out that for the European countries, sometimes it's impossible to check whether the document is fake, because when they send a request to Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, the request is not denied, but it just comes after a very, very long time. So there is no way for them to check. Another thing that helps us discover these sanction evasion schemes is that when they take the goods across the border, somebody spoke about it already, they usually have two sets of documents. So one set is when they import from the EU, is what they show to the EU border, and the second set that they show when they enter Belarus or Russia. And because of these fake transit or interrupted transit schemes like Linda showed, when they say it goes to Kazakhstan, but in fact it stops either in Belarus or in Russia on the way. This is the picture that the European customs see it, but the Russians, they have the real documents which shows where these goods end up. And these documents are often leaked through databases that you can purchase, the kind like Impergenius.
And when it comes to Belarus, how many goods are allowed to export to Belarus, but not allowed to export to Russia?
There is a significant amount, and now we know that there is talks in the EU of synchronizing the sanctions regime of Belarus and Russia. But generally, Belarus, after all these so many sanctions being imposed against it, has the second record biggest trade in its history. So you would think that with all the trade limitations, the trade would decrease, but now Belarus is enjoying the second biggest trade boom in history, both import and export, after 2011. 2011 was the year when Belarus was used as a big contraband hub by Russian oil producers, because when they exported oil via Belarus, then they wouldn't have to pay customs duties. The code was changed from being a petroleum product, it pretended to be a chemical product. So actually they trained in avoiding sanctions by actually cheating their own governments on export duties back in 2011, and now is the second biggest record. So this shows basically what a big hub of sanctions evasion Belarus is now for Russia.
And now let's move to Central Asia and Caucasus. Raba, I know you've worked on multiple stories that dig into sanction evasion by using those countries as cover. So please tell the audience about this.
Sure. So I've worked on some stories, and our team, I can give you an overview of a few stories that our team has worked on, and then OCCRP, of course, works with all sorts of local media outlets. And the South Caucasus and Central Asia, so for all these countries, Russia has always been a major trading partner. And for at least three of these countries, they are, so Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Armenia, it's a particular issue because they're members of the Russian, the customs union, along with Russia and Belarus, which means that there are no customs checks when goods cross those borders, and so it, of course, raises the expands the possibilities for sanctions evasions through those countries exponentially. And while there's a gap in sanctions between Belarus and Russia, these countries in the South Caucasus and Central Asia face almost no sanctions. It's a tiny amount, only targeted against a few individual companies, and no sectoral sanctions on most of these. So anyway, we have done several stories about this. For example, there was a collaboration that OCCRP did with Vlast, which is a media from Kazakhstan, and the Russian independent media iStories, which was about cotton from Uzbekistan, which it was unclear to me before this story came out what the military use of cotton might be. But what was noticed was that after the war started, the exports of cotton from Central Asia to Russia spiked. So from Uzbekistan, in 2021, they exported $1.2 million worth of cotton into Russia, and in 2022 it went up to $5 million. From Kazakhstan, we also saw a big jump from 2.7 million to 4.3 million in 2022. And that rise continued. It fell in 2023 in Kazakhstan, but it continued to rise all the way to 8.8 million in Uzbekistan. Cotton pulp, also called cotton cellulose, is actually an important ingredient used for various kinds of explosives. Cotton pulp is found in gunpowder. Cotton pulp is also used for certain types of rocket fuel. And when journalists were able to get documents, leaked documents from Russia's tax service, and also public procurement documents in Russia, and found that the companies in Uzbekistan that were exporting to Russia exported to Russian companies that had state contracts in Russia with defense companies, with ammunitions plants, and so anyway, it's an obvious case of funding or supplying important ammunition for the Russian army, although it's cotton. There was another story that we did, so OCCRP together with, once again, iStories from Russia, Vlast from Kazakhstan, and Der Spiegel from Germany, about drones. So Kazakhstan, in 2021, Kazakhstan exported so few drones to Russia, it does not show up in the foreign trade data at all. In 2022, after the war started, it jumped to $5 million. $5 million import and millions of dollars in export to Russia. The journalists focused on one particular type of drone. There's one particular brand. There's a Chinese manufacturer called DJI. And a journalist who specializes in studying drones found that using various kinds of using open source intelligence, 59% of the drones they identified in the war zone came from this company, from DJI. And the drones are not specifically designed for military use, but they can easily be adapted for military use. So DJI claims that it doesn't sell directly to Russia or Ukraine. And it has complied with some sanctions when a supplier of DJI equipment was sanctioned, based in Dubai. It stopped supplying that. Company. However, there are no restrictions on selling drones to Kazakhstan. And so what journalists found was that a subsidiary of DJI in the Netherlands sells drones to a Kazakh company called Aspan Arba, which means sky mechanics. Aspan Arba then sells those to a Russian company called Nebesnaya Mechanika, which also means sky mechanics. Those two companies are owned by the same man, a Russian citizen named Ilya Goldberg. Journalists also found that Nebesnaya Mechanika then sells those drones to various veterans organizations in Russia, to pro-war NGOs that are trying to support the military with equipment and funding, and even sells some of them through Ozon, which is like the Russian Amazon, just online to whoever wants to buy them. In Kazakhstan, Aspan Arba has been licensed by the Ministry of Digital Development to purchase 18,000 different drones from DJI, a total of $45 million. So anyway, the lack of sanctions on Kazakhstan opens this door for tens of millions of dollars of drones going straight to the battle zone. Maybe we'll leave it there for now.
And now I will be very happy to give the word to Sanita because I'm looking forward on how she's going to bash our region for conflicting moralities, let's say, because, all of the Baltics are absolutely pro-Ukraine and very vocal about it, but when it comes to trade, we've had multiple cases when countries from our region were still are the leaders of shady exports and sanction violations when it comes to actually exporting goods that can be used and are being used to kill people in Ukraine. So, Sanita, the floor is yours.
And you know what they said when this panel started? They said each of you gets 5 minutes. Look at the clock. So we are journalists. We never stick to it. So I'll try. I'll put an alarm on. Right. I happen to be from a country who has a border both with Russia and with Belarus. So we get the best of the both worlds in terms of sanction evasion. So we in Baltica look at this in a bit broader way. One way is illegal. You break sanctions, it's illegal. But there's also immoral way, which is selling luxury goods to Russia while it keeps killing Ukrainians. Allow people to keep their lifestyles while the other people are dying because of them. So we look at it broader. So what we did is we have quite a strong push in Latvia in radical quotas to end all trade in Russia, with Russia. At all, because it brings no good. It brings a crime to your country, which we saw with selling golden visas. It brings a lot of illegal money, which we saw in our banking sector. And now it's breaking sanctions and helping to kill Ukrainians. So what we did is we looked at the overall exports of Latvian companies to Russia after the beginning of the war. And it was kind of, yeah, it's legal. But why are you doing this? Why are you supplying We've become one of the biggest suppliers of alcohol to Russia between EU countries. I mean, we are exporting that Spanish and French wine, which Medvedev drinks and then rants on Twitter about nuking the West. It's kind of pretty interesting story as such. So we looked at the companies which are exporting. And what we learned, because this panel was supposed to give you an insight of how the weird brains of our works in journalism. So what we found out is Latvian exporters, some of them, can look very okay when you look at them in Latvia. They're producing chocolate for vegans or... Don't get me started. But then you take the same people, you look in the Russian databases, and you see that they have a separate companies which actually supply goods to Russian defense industry or the goods to Russian propaganda industry. So they have two separate businesses. They're not sanctioned in Latvia because no one knows that they're actually doing this stuff there. So that's one way how to look. If you have a company, look at Russian procurement databases because they're quite open about it. Another thing which we found out, because we looked at exporters and we also looked at importers. And in importers and transitors, you find the companies which are on American sanction list, but is not on European. So we have a problem with Belarus, that they have 1/3 of sanctions which Russia has, and so everything goes through Belarus, which is sanctions then. But Americans have different sanction lists than Europeans. It's mostly wider. So for example, Mr. Vekselberg will be sanctioned in States, but not in Europe. Companies related to him transit oil products through Latvia and metals through Latvia massively. It's not illegal by EU rules, but it is by Americans, so something shady is going on there. So what is essential in these investigations? They already touched upon it. First of all, from those of you who are from policy side, please keep pushing, uniting Belarusian and Russian sanctions. There was a logic in beginning to say, okay, Lukashenko was just, beating up his own people, faking elections and driving free media out of the country, which is less criminal than, killing Ukrainians. But they are both at it now. Belarus is officially part of the war. So there is no reason why the sanction list is different there. And by the way, EU today adopted 14th packet of sanctions, and they still keep wrangling about the Belarusian cars until next week, like should we export luxury cars to Belarus? So there has to be strong policy push on that. The same goes to unifying the United States and European sanction lists, because otherwise Europeans keep doing what Americans already said is illegal. And third thing is, I would argue for radical transparency of customs data while the war is going on. Because Sharunas was showing you these wonderful graphs, like how much Europeans suddenly start to import from Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Armenia. But what we see as a journalists, we see only the volumes. We don't see, legally, you see, I still have a minute. We don't see what is within those graphs, which companies, which volumes, and what is the end point where they are going to end up. These data are available only to customs. And we are currently in a situation when we buy these import-export genius databases, which gets data from Russia. So we have to rely on Russian data because we can't have a European ones, because there's data protection has been going on for years. So I would say, if you really want to fight sanction evasion effectively, Europeans have to agree to open up customs data for the time of the war, at least with Eurasian Economic Union countries. That will not cover Turkey, that will not cover Arab Emirates, but it will cover the first ones, the closest ones. There's no reason to hide it, because genuinely you see how something which starts from somewhere ends up in Ukraine in a battlefield, and how you see it. This is the last thing I'm going to say, and then I'm going to shut up. Sharunas mentioned customs codes, which before the war, I don't think we knew about much. It was kind of statistics. But these customs codes, Ukrainians has made a study, because you have like banned customs codes in Europe, but then they call it strategic ingredients, which they have found on a battlefield. And it's like they have a study of over 300 customs codes, which are legal, but which has been found in ammunition, which has been found in telecoms, etc. So what we do is, when we get these detailed data with customs codes, even from legal companies who are legally exporting, we run them by this database. Because if the match is there, it doesn't mean the company is doing something illegal, but it's quite possible that something shady is going on there. So these are like the four things: unify sanctions between Russians, Belarusians, United States and Europe as much as possible, open customs data, and start comparing what is in regular export companies, what are they actually doing. And that's what we have learned in these 2.5 years, because before that, we were all busy with money laundering investigations, and then that has completely disappeared because of the war.
Oh, actually, I'm not going to let you go, and I want you to bash our region again.
You always can trust me on that.
Stas already gave an example. When the Baltic started limiting the imports of so-called Central Asian wood, the flow was just redirected to Poland. In the very recent case we did together with Baltica, we had exports of ACs to Kyrgyzstan stopped by the Lithuanian customs, but it just moved to Latvia in 1.5 months. So what's going on? Why are the European countries on the eastern border unable to stop this trade?
Because they're benefiting from it. As soon as one of them closes and it's not something illegal, or even if it's illegal, another one takes it up. It's the same thing with the European discussion about luxury cars to Belarus, when France and Germany says, well, actually, it's fine, because we are only talking about things which are used for war, and these cars are not, so why not? This is the reason why we are not really doing it. But let me bring in some hope in all this bleakness. I don't know how much of you have ever heard about manganese ore. Neither did I, a couple of months ago. But as Rob was explaining about cotton, that it can be used in textile and then it can be used in aviation fuel. Manganese ore can be used to make forks and to make tanks. And suddenly it turned out that manganese ore is massively going through the Latvian ports. Suddenly, because we didn't have it before the war. And suddenly it is there. It's not a banned good because, I mean, forks have to be made of something, right? So, and journalists sometimes are kind of cynical about sanction stories, saying they're complex, they're not sexy. I know that yours are exceptional in that sense, but they're kind of boring. But the manganese ore story came out in the Baltics, that we are actually becoming a hub of it. And people went out in Latvia to protest. They were blocking the train carriages, saying we don't want our hands in blood. And then everyone was going to government saying, why are you not banning it? And they said, you know what? If we are going to ban it, they will not. And Estonians will not as well. And there was always a political element in it, because there were some ex-prime minister companies involved in that trade in both countries, us and Estonia. So they said, we're not going to ban this because someone else will take it up. So either all of Europe bans it or not. And surprise, today they actually did. So this is the only way how we are going to do something in the Baltics and in EU countries, if all of us ban it. If we do kind of individual things out of our own economic interests, someone else will take it up.
Stas?
Yeah. So I wanted to add about the efficiency of the EU sanctions. So what we're seeing basically is that the EU does not have a mechanism of enforcing sanctions. It's formally the responsibility of the member states, but as we've just shown, when individual member states become more effective and active, they become victim to their own effectiveness. They bear the costs of blocking, but and the goods still get into them from another side. And another typical problem is, like, after sanctioning all like Lukashenko's wallets, for example, oligarchs, they have not really interrupted any of their businesses, because the businesses are re-registered onto managers or relatives, and not a single one of these proxies of Lukashenko's proxies, has actually been sanctioned. So it's actually similar, like when you ban drugs, for example, you outlaw drugs, but then in order to convict every illegal drug dealer, you have to make a parliament decision, and moreover a unanimous parliament decision, because in the EU, to make new sanctions, you have to make a unanimous decision. So EU does not have, unlike the Americans, the EU does not have a separation between a political decision to sanction something, and then it lacks the technical body to follow it up. So the way that I see it, it is trying to be tackled is that there are recently intensification of meetings of Belarus border countries, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia, to discuss regional cooperation on blocking that. So it looks like for the EU, because, for example, Lithuania, which is now apparently the champion in sanctions evasion control, it's not always acting within the limits of the EU sanctions mechanism. It's taking proactive steps in blocking some of the schemes, which are even sometimes hard to prove, but are apparent, such as some suspicious transit. So they have no reason, according to EU sanctions, to block transit via Russia, but they know this transit is going to be interrupted. So they just block some of the goods. So, yeah, probably the the solution is the regional cooperation, and that, for example, the journalists from these countries, if they apply grassroots pressure by making more publications about about this, so that would help the process. And just last thing, so that our Baltic friends don't feel so bad about their own countries being used for sanctions evasion. In one of our recent investigations, we came across a case of luxury cars imports to Russia via Belarus from Ukraine. So there was a businessman in Lviv who bought Maybach and other luxury cars from salons in Ukraine and was re-exporting them via EU, Belarus, and into Russia. And the Ukrainian police actually cracked down on him just a few months ago. He ran to Poland, and Ukrainians asked for his extradition, but Poland say that doesn't want to. So, yeah, that's one of the things that's happening.
You mentioned cars, and that reminded me of a very recent case as well. With the luxury cars, it actually started in Poland. So the Polish authorities started seeing that something suspicious is going on. You know, there's this massive flow of luxury cars to Belarus, which doesn't make sense. And then they started asking for extra documents and extra evidence that shows that those cars are actually arriving in, let's say, Kazakhstan. And so it stopped, because they can't provide this kind of evidence, including the manufacturer declaration that says that, well, let's say BMW knows that this car is really going to Kazakhstan. That proved to be extremely efficient. Then the flow moves north to Lithuania. The Lithuanian customs go, oh, what the hell is going on? They reach out to Poland. The Polish guys said how they fixed it. Lithuania reapplies the same procedure, and it stops. 2 weeks later, they get a call from their colleagues in Estonia. Well, hello, what's going on, and why do we have all those cars? So unifying practices and mechanisms is absolutely key. And, well, I hope our region will be able to become the role model for the entire EU. But when it comes to actual problems, you know, we've shared multiple success stories, but what are the problems in actually obtaining data and evidence? Anita, you've already mentioned some of it, but I guess not all.
No, I think it's the main drill I have these days is really customs data. We need them. We just need them because otherwise we can't prove where the thing is going and is it ending up with military or not. So I think for us that's a major problem. Another thing is going after these individual exporters don't quite cut it for me, because we will unmask one Lithuanian company, one Latvian company, and someone else will take it over. So that's why I think the sectoral sanctions as such are the best, and the wider they are, the better, because the customs codes have actually not 4 numbers, but I think 8. And if you ban all 8 of them, then it's completely illegal, that I don't have to figure out is it semi-legal or not. So sectoral sanctions have to be applied and understood. And the third thing is, if there are people from law enforcement in this room, please come to us when you can't prove something. Because the level of proof in journalism is lower than the level in a criminal case. You will at least expose what's going on. You will not get them in jail, but you'll be able to tell. And in this sense, I think I haven't seen another investigations when we have so many whistleblowers. Because people in the Baltic region are genuinely upset about what's going on in Ukraine. So people who work in state institutions are willing to take one step further than they usually do and just give us some of those data, just because they feel it's wrong to allow this kind of trade. So I think this kind of morality aspect works quite well in terms of getting sources in sanction stories, but what we really, really, really need is the hard data, the hard data about individual companies and volumes. And if there is anyone who works in IT and have a little spare time, I'm looking forward to have a tool which would automatically detect which export groups from and in EU is going up and down. Because we realized the Kazakh-Kyrgyz problem very quickly because it was logical and it was in the data. But if I had a tool which would show, hey, Sanita, Latvia is becoming the biggest alcohol exporter in EU, and you don't even have a vineyard, so what's this? So that kind of automated thing would help us all to see actually where the shady things are starting. And us all, I mean journalists, civil society, Ukrainians, police, anyone. So there used to be very good hackathons. So I think anti-corruption hackathon could come up with this one.
Yeah, what Sanita was telling reminded me of this, with these sectoral sanctions. Now the sanctions are very complex and sometimes difficult to understand. And for example, the export of excavators to Russia was banned quite early in one of the first sanction packages. And as you know, civilian excavators can be used for digging trenches close to the Ukrainian border. And when I searched for the Russian customs data, I saw that hundreds of excavators were shipped via Finland to Russia. And I was, oh, whoa, how is it possible that our customs don't see these big yellow excavators going over the border? It was like over 200 of them. But it turned out that these specific excavators were not under sanctions. And the difference between the sanctioned ones and the ones that were legal was just a technical detail in the wheels, in the wheel construction. So this complexity makes it very difficult to cover the sanctions.
Yeah, and one last thing about the Russian customs data. Being a corrupt country is wonderful in that sense that you can buy these things. You can't in other countries. But I'm afraid that at some point, if we keep relying on Russian customs data, they'll start to fake them. They'll simply start to fake them. And nothing will show up like going somewhere there unless we open our own. Because that's the only way how to double-check it. And currently, unfortunately, we are relying on commercial database buying it from the Russians and the Belarusians and Kazakhs and Kyrgyz.
A question for the audience. Is anyone from Poland here? Damn it. I wanted to shame Poland publicly, and well, I'm going to do that in front of a lot of people not from Poland. When it comes to actually making an impact, Poland sucks. I'm going to keep it brief. Poland sucks. They are doing nothing in spite of the fact that they know what's going on. They know that they definitely have blood on their hands. But Poland still is failing to act, even though we are moving to unify border controls across the eastern border, so all the Baltics plus Finland plus Poland. So far, we see no effect in Poland exactly. I know there have been effects in Estonia, in Finland, in Latvia. Well, you had the public uprising, which is absolutely amazing because, well, in our case, the public didn't give a damn, but the government felt ashamed. That's why after one of the stories we did, we had huge increases in sanction control and a result of a single year in a single institution, which is the Lithuanian National Railways, is 52,000 railway cars disallowed to cross the border in one direction or the other, which is millions in damages for the Lukashenko and the Putin regimes. So that's a way to make an impact, but of course the authorities have to care. What can we do to actually catalyze that impact within our region and beyond it? Any ideas? I want something positive, hopefully.
No, I can't really see. I agree on that the custom data should be open from the Western countries. That would, I think, make a big impact. The more people checking the data, the more you can find.
And there's the bigger risk of being named and shamed. I guess lots of businesses are scared to death of that data going public.
They are, and that's what Latvians did as a state. Our Ministry of Economy started to publish the data about exporters to Russia. They promised they'll do it every quarter, but they do it now every 6 months. They don't do it retrospectively. It's like only this quarter, these companies were exporting to Russia. They say nothing more, just the name of the companies. They don't say volumes or whatever. That's for journalists to go and find out. The reason why they did it is exactly naming and shaming, because Latvian public is not really wild, part of it about businesses having ties with Russia. So they just say, these are the exporters. What they don't do is they don't name importers. They don't name importers, saying we have a problem because some of it is transit. I don't buy this argument. It's a total bullshit. Some of it is transit, but so what? It's still Russian trade. So just go out and publish it. But in terms of how to make an impact and to turn it into something positive, I remember doing stories about money laundering. And the problem with them was you couldn't show the victim. You couldn't show the real victim because it's something so invisible. It's just the white-collar crime. And with Russian sanctions, and to some extent Belarusian, I think we all know who the victims are. And those victims are there every day. So I think we have to keep talking about actually reason why we have sanctions, which is weakening Russia, weakening the possibility to produce the military stuff. And just keep repeating it. Like we said in Baltica, at the beginning of the year, we have this meeting about what we are going to do for this year. What's going to be our subject? And I said, sanctions is going to be one of them. I don't care that people don't massively feel about it. It's just important. It's important for policymakers. It's important for our law enforcement. We'll just keep doing those stories. And okay, Sharunas, let's not deny it. We kind of like it, when you go undercover to one of those companies and they start telling you what it is and what it isn't. It's quite fun in journalistic terms, but the impact is there. So we just keep doing it like stubbornly as always, like just keep doing it until something changes.
And now I'd like to open up the floor to questions. Oh, that was fast. Do you have a microphone?
Hi, I'm Kelly from OCCRP, basically colleague of everyone here. So my question is very technical, but I'm very interested about the tracker, because we actually wanted to do the same thing in case of Georgia, to kind of put the trackers on the car and see where it's going. But the case is we got a bit scared because the reason we have an experience of how the border checks works in the case of Azerbaijan, between Georgia and Azerbaijan, how deeply cars are checked. They make you take your luggage out, they open it, they're literally digging. So it kind of made us freaked out that what if there is a really serious security on the border, and what if actually they have some kind of thing that will understand the car has a tracker, and through the cameras they can understand who put the tracker. Because in our case it was different. Reporters went to the border. They didn't chase the cars it was different. They went to the border to basically put the trackers, but then we got so scared that there were a lot of cameras, and what is the risk that they will be caught? Could you just maybe explain this part? I know it's very technical, but I'd like to clarify this a bit.
Now we put the trackers before the customs station. So I'm not sure how it looks like exactly at the customs station at the border, the Finnish one and the Russian one. But at this case, they did not find it, not in Finland or not in Russia. And actually, I think it also shows that you can, now it was just these trackers, but you could also hide something else inside the car without the custom officers finding it. We were not that afraid about this one, but of course our lawyers at Yle, they looked through this carefully, and the conclusion was that this is an extraordinary journalistic method, and that it's important to investigate on sanctions, and this is actually the only way to do it. So we had a green card from the lawyers and also our editor-in-chief to put the trackers. So, and of course they looked at it from the Finnish perspective. They were not thinking so much about what the Russian law would say about it.
And would you have taken the risk of actually chasing that truck all the way to the border and waiting for it to stop in the queue, waiting to cross Russia, and then plant the tracker?
I'm not sure. We were actually planning it very well, we thought, but then when we actually found the truck with the cars, our plans were just gone. I'm not sure. Now we were lucky to make it, but yeah.
More questions?
Thank you very much. I'm Karina Pavlova. I'm a Senior Advocacy Officer on Anti-Corruption and IRFS in Geneva. I have a very quick question. You mentioned Kazakhstan a lot of times today, and I don't have an impression that something's been done about it. You may also correct me if I'm wrong. I'm specifically, for example, thinking about components that are found in Ukrainian missiles, that in Ukraine, in the Russian missiles, basically out of 2,500 components, 70% come from US, then there is Switzerland, Germany, Japan. And the idea was that these dual goods were banned from export to Russia, but they were bought through third parties. And then EU introduced, for example, the 12th package sanction, where they asked the contractors to contractually ban actually the resale to Russia. But for me, it's just a matter of time before they start reselling it to Kazakhstan, and then Kazakhstan starts reselling it to Russia. So basically, what do you think about this role of Kazakhstan in all these schemes, and do you feel there is something done about it, or there is some movement in this direction?
Yeah, okay, so unfortunately not much movement in this direction. So as I said, there are no sectoral sanctions against Kazakhstan. You can sell those drones that I mentioned. Kazakhstan is used for two purposes. One is to actually physically bring goods, sanctioned goods into Russia, and the other is companies are created there for false transit schemes where they're, for instance, diverted through Belarus. They're supposed to be shipped to a Kazakh company in Belarus. They're just turned into Russia. And I believe for a long time, I think for maybe the first 2 years of the war, there were sanctions against individual companies in Kazakhstan, but I think it was only like subsidiaries of a few Russian companies with Russian owners. And we had an investigation that our partners Bureau Media did with some assistance from us. Had a success recently. I think it was just a week or two ago that a company we reported on that was serving the function of, it was just a company on paper where things were supposedly being shipped to, but not actually. It was sanctioned, but this is the problem. It's just one company. It's just on paper. You can, tomorrow you could create another one that's exactly the same. And I don't see any movement towards, broadening the sanctions. There's been some, interesting writing about how Kazakhstan's diplomatic efforts. They've been doing a pretty good job of, presenting themselves as being responsible of playing different sides. And for now, for now, the situation remains as it has been for the past 2 years, where it's just a huge gap in all the sanctions regimes.
I might just add to that a little. You mentioned the diplomatic efforts, but there's also the administrative level, where the authorities of Central Asia and the Caucasus countries claim to cooperate with the European authorities, but in fact, it's not happening. I actually had a case myself. It was in Uzbekistan. It was a state-owned company, and there was a senior manager of the company whose signatures were being forged in order to smuggle Belarusian merchandise into the EU. I found the guy, I called him. He was angry as hell. He promised to fly over to Lithuania to testify to law enforcement, but after I reached out to the company that was forging his signatures, he disappeared. He just kept ghosting me, and 2 days later I received a new set of documents from the company claiming it's all legit, signed by the same guy. So it's a huge volume of pressure within the country as well. But in my personal take, I think it's a bit, chasing the wind if you go punishing companies in Central Asia, in Turkey, the Caucasus. I think we should go after the companies here in the Western Hemisphere, because they are benefiting. Of course, it's damn hard to prove that, let's say, German, Lithuanian, American companies are knowingly benefiting from sanction evasion. But if we go after them and if we fine them as much as we can, it's the American practice, huge fines for sanction evasion just to make it too big of a risk. Business is a risk-based operation. If they see the risk is too big financially, I'm not talking about criminal responsibility, I think that's just baloney. If they see they can lose a lot of money by doing this, less companies will be involved in it. So I think that's the way to go, but it needs a lot of political will, especially in the EU when we have a single person called Orban who can just sabotage anything, and that's the sad part. More questions? Yep.
Hi, my name is Leonie Kievsky from Follow the Money. I was a trade reporter before, so I'm very keen on knowing more about the trade data aspect of it. One way, of course, to find essentially the customs codes or the trade codes is if you've been tipped off, where there might be smuggling essentially or sanctions evasion. But are there more proactive ways that you found, because you cannot go through every line, of course, to see if which sanctioned product has seen a change in patterns. So I wonder, is there a way that you found to kind of proactively find those goods where that's changed without having had a tip-off or some media reports? I mean, for example, the wood example was I think was reported before, and then you can expand on it. But what if you don't have those and you want to kind of find the goods that haven't actually been reported on before, for example? Thank you.
We did had one case because it was the beginning. I think even before the Ukrainian war, it was related to Russia's and Belarus's sanctions, when simply one reporter was way too curious and started to go deeper and deeper in those customs codes until he found that there is huge increase of this one of the codes, and we never had it before. And that was Estonia and Latvia, but it was just by coincidence. But other than that, as I said, there's no good method, and that's why I really want to have someone to make, with the development of artificial intelligence at the moment, there has to be a way to develop a tool which basically signals about each country. This code is up, this code is down, but currently nothing. It's just digging, and we reporters, we're weird people. We go home and we can't forget that customs code, and then you just sit there in the evening and go through everything until you find something. But it's time consuming. I hate it. So please, again, if someone can make that tool will be eternally grateful.
We have had, I think, wood was actually was coming from analysis of statistics, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan in the first place. Also fertilizers that we did together with the Lithuanian partners. So basically, a way in that all that mass of statistics to figure out those jumps is when you look at important industries and you see that they should be affected by sanctions, but in fact they're not. So, for example, in Belarus, when you have big exporters that continue to work, so this is a tip-off to go to Eurostat and check that what was replaced by what replaced imports from that particular industry, and if it couldn't be fake imports. So yeah, so a way is to basically look at important industries who were supposed to be affected but are not.
Actually, I think we can all agree that if somebody develops a tool that can quickly digest trade statistics from places like Eurostat, Comtrade, or national statistics databases, that can be a game changer. So, like Sanita said, IT people, here. We've got a great project to pitch for you. And we also had a question right there, I think.
Thank you. Thank you to all of the panelists here for this information. Tetiana Hutor from the Kyiv-based think tank Institute of Legislative Ideas. So we are working on sanction policy as well, and especially reparations. Of course, we love the idea of banning all the trade with Russia, but we understand that it's quite, as for now, it's kind of impossible. So because the business is on the first place and money is on the first place. So now we are thinking of maybe the, for example, 5% of surcharge on all the remaining trading with Russia. But the first step to this must be the disclosure of Russian exposure. So what do you think of the idea and the like how realistic the idea of disclosing of all the Russian exposure? Like, how can we convince your governments? Let's start from your governments. It would be much easier than Western governments, but just the main goal is Western governments, as you understand. I'm sure you understand that, and why we have to convince them to mandate their regulators to introduce the disclosure of Russia's exposure for all publicly traded companies. And I'm talking about the disclosure of tax paid there, of the total revenue from Russian sources, and the quantity of procurement from Russia. So, like, that's it. What you feel about this idea, and how we can implement it. Thank you.
Sanita, you already mentioned the Latvian naming and shaming, so maybe you got more of this.
Yeah, but not only that. Let me go back to manganese ore story. The manganese ore story originated from Ukrainians who knew the industry and who came to Estonians and said, listen, this is going on in your ports. And they were not hoping that we will ban the manganese ore, because it's a good business. They said, listen, why don't you put a tax, 300% tax on this one, because your budget kind of needs it. And it's true. Our economy is not in a great shape. It's not growing that quickly. So we've started to tax banks for the extra profits they've made. And Ukrainians were really clever, saying, well, okay, don't ban it, but why don't you really tax it so you get the money? And that is the language governments understand. So it worked out better than they hoped. But I think the direction is explaining the benefits, not only saying Ukraine needs this, but your own benefit is actually getting that. Another thing is, let me give you an example with golden visas. When we started doing these stories with OCCRP a long time ago, the attitude was, so what? Everyone trades golden visas. You know, some of us sell passports. Maybe that's not great, but everyone trades golden visas. And then with every year, seeing what kind of criminal money was coming in through the golden visas, the governments just changed their mind. So what I can advise you is just be persuasive. Just be persuasive. Go and repeat it. It takes a long time for European governments to move. But just plant the idea that they should have this exposure. I mean, in the Baltics, that wouldn't be a problem, because we do realize the consequences of that, and a lot of that data is public. But I think it's different. The further you get from Russia, the more difficult it becomes to persuade that it is actually the problem. But just run with it. And another thing is, civil societies are your friends. Because I mentioned the Latvians going out protesting against manganese ore. Another thing which our civil society did, they sat at the border, not the border crossing, at the railways, and just filmed for 24 hours how much Russian cargo comes in. And there was an obnoxious amount of the railway carriages. And when you see it physically, you realize that trade is just blooming, you know, all the sanctions is just minimal. So think of them as your friends, and at some point something will start moving. That's the best I can suggest.
And anyone else? Then I guess we have time for one last question, and we will let you all enjoy the longest evening in the year. No last question? Well, in that case, thank you all. It was amazing, and keep up the good work, guys.